When it came time to get my first house, I was like, screw the normal thing I'm supposed to be doing. Like, right now, I'm in a house that is completely off-grid. It makes me nervous for the future of our planet. If the people who are running the ship have the same kind of short-sightedness issues that so many of the rest of us seem to suffer from, if you're fighting against nature, nature's always going to win. Technology doesn't always work for us. And when it doesn't work, if you're not ready for that, it can be really, really uncomfortable. Take it one step at a time, solve this problem, solve this problem. It is a wonderful feeling to just have an openness at the beginning of each day. It's not about making everything perfect for yourself. It's not about living forever. It's just about trying to make your time better. You look back through history and the anomaly is stable civilizations. The question about whether those types of worst case scenarios will happen, honestly, how could they not?
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today on the channel, it's an honor to have Praxis Prepper. He goes by Praxis Prepper, that's his YouTube channel. You've probably seen his extensive library of videos, lots of very educational and humorous stuff at the same time. I would encourage people to go and check out his channel if you want to learn how to build an off-grid homestead. I want to know, you talked about how this kind of came organically for you. Typically, I think people do tend to come from the right side of the political spectrum. What I've noticed recently is there's a lot more people on the left prepping than people realize. What were your motivations to lead this lifestyle? Did you live in the city before?
When it came time to get my first house, I was like, screw the normal thing I'm supposed to be doing. I'm going to get a trailer. I'm going to live in a trailer. And that was great for the first summer. And then this thing called winter in New England came by, and it's not like movie stars all make it out to be living out of a trailer. It gets really cold, and the parts of the trailer aren't necessarily meant to deal with that kind of thing. I had the heaters break down. I was out in the middle of February, trying to replace the squirrel cage on burned out heaters. And the way cuts bleed when it's really cold outside, and I had slices all over my hands. It was a difficult situation. And it really instilled in me the value of simplicity, because it's really frustrating when you're cold and you're in a space and you can't get yourself warm. And that was my first experience with butting up against the realities that technology doesn't always work for us. And when it doesn't work, if you're not ready for that, it can be really, really uncomfortable. So from there, I decided that I was going to build my own house. I don't know why I did that. I think one of my best friends from high school gave me a book about how to build your own house. He was this kind of weirdo, kind of crunchy hippie guy, and he gave me this book written by this guy off in Montana named Tom Elpel. He built his own house, and I was thinking, that's great, I'll do that. I'd never even built a birdhouse prior to that. Oftentimes, I feel as though I tend to be able to do people's jobs better than they can. And, that includes, a lot of plumbers that I've met and electricians that I've met and carpenters that I've met. So I had in my head that, if these people can do this, build this house, I'm sure I can figure it out. And I did. I started September 1st of whatever year it was, 2004 or something like that, 2004. And by Christmas, the house was done. I mean, it's just a couple of months, worked really, really hard. I didn't have kids at that point, so you could do nice long days. Got the place together, and honest to God, it was the most livable, comfortable house I'd ever lived in. We had a wood stove in there because I didn't want to bother with those squirrel cages and blowers from the camper that I was in. And it was wonderful. We were on grid at that point. We didn't have solar panels or any of that kind of stuff. Fast forward a couple years further into the future, and then we have an ice storm. And I get another lesson on, when technology doesn't work, like the electrical grid, how uncomfortable that can make you. After the ice storm, we were without power for 9.5 days. And it's not just 9 days, it's 9.5 days. I get credit for that last half day, because after 9 days of not showering, that extra half day is like murder. So 9.5 days we're without power. It's in the middle of the winter, so we didn't really have a lot of problems with refrigeration. I had the wood stove so we could keep ourselves warm, but I didn't have any water. I couldn't run water from the well because I didn't have electricity. I had to take all my food outside, put it on the porch in a cooler in order to keep the food from spoiling. It was still kind of a pain in the butt because I wasn't prepared for it. And that was my second kick in the butt to tell me, you need to take more steps in order to make yourself more prepared, or things like this are just going to happen again. This is all happening right around the same time as, the world was all going crazy after 9/11, and, law enforcement was, in some people's view, maybe overexpressing itself. And so I personally started kind of going down that rabbit hole of, what if this is the possible future that we're headed for? What if this is the possible future that we're headed for? Because you remember after 9/11, it was like there was anthrax in the mail, and, nobody knew what was going to happen. So, and it's just one of those things where you identify a problem, you come up with a solution, you solve it, and then you never really have to worry about that again. And then your brain just finds other issues that you're going to be facing in life, and you solve that problem, And at the moment where I am right now in my development, I'm a lot farther ahead than many people, but I would still have a lot of hassles if society really locked up and stopped functioning. So there are still things that I have to work on, but that's the way that I address it and approach it, is that I just kind of take it one step at a time, solve this problem. Fast forward a couple of months and you've made a really big jump, but you did it in tiny little steps, so it never really hurt. And that's the same way that I approach prepping, is just tiny little steps, one at a time.
Obviously, the financial is going to be the biggest sticking point for a lot of people. So you used to work in television, is that correct?
I used to work in television, and I made a decent living at it. Back at that time, I would pull like 30 or 40,000 a year. So that wasn't a tremendous amount of money as compared to a lot of other people. But what I was really good at was saving. I was really good at just not wasting money. So that's what I had always done, is I just tried not to spend extra money. And the nice thing about saving up money for preps is if you choose the right kind of preps, you can get preps that are going to be paying you back kind of instantly. Right now, I'm in a house that is completely off-grid. But being off-grid like that, it saves me a tremendous amount of money every single month. And all that money that I'm saving can get kind of paid forward into other preps. So if you choose the right kind of preps to do first, they can kind of pave the way for other things. And you don't have to jump in 100%. Again, it's that kind of incremental, kind of little baby steps thing.
How did you decide on the land that you chose? What were some of the factors that you considered there?
I never like to think about things in terms of what's the best choice, because there are oftentimes many good choices, and there's oftentimes many bad choices. And I feel like people are oftentimes paralyzed by the idea of waiting for the absolute ideal, or waiting to make a decision until they know all the facts. You're thinking about buying land, you have to have some criteria. But if you get too caught up in, whatever kind of vision that you have, that, there's got to be snow-capped mountains, off on the horizon, or, you've got a certain vision of what kind of a beautiful waterfall with, Caribbean turquoise waters, or whatever kind of vision you might have in your head. It's important to separate, the fantasy of what's perfect from what's thoroughly good enough. There are a lot of really great options out there. And you can oftentimes save a lot of money if you're able to see value in things that other people miss. And one of the biggest ways you can do that, if you're looking for land, is that you can get really good deals on land if you are getting land that ain't nobody else want, because it's a pain in the butt for some reason. Most people, when they're buying land, they want to be able to have electrical service to that land. Maybe they want to have, town water, or, lightning fast internet, or whatever they're looking for, proximity to shopping centers, all these kind of conveniences that people become kind of addicted to. Those are the types of things that people are usually looking for in land. So if you're looking for land and you can accept that you aren't necessarily going to have those things, especially convenient road access, you can get some really, really great deals on land. There are some things you definitely want to look for, though. You don't want to get something that's going to flood. You want to have a place that doesn't have all the problems that you are trying to get away from, whether that is, people issues. You want to have a place that actually solves a lot of your problems, but it's okay to have kind of an open palette. It could be a place that's kind of an open field. It could be a place that is more forested. It could be a place that's rocky. It could be a place that is rolling hills. There are all sorts of different options for what you could work with. And even if you found like the absolute perfect piece of property, there's always some boulder where you don't want it, or there's some spring where you don't want it, or there's a mud puddle somewhere that's happens to be right in the middle of where your driveway is going to be. So whatever kind of place you end up finding, you're always going to have all these curveballs. So if you can kind of get yourself into the mindset of taking the best attributes of whatever place that you find, I think that's going to be a much more functional way to kind of address the challenge of... I'm sorry, go ahead.
What you just said was incredibly important, because this is the sticking point for a lot of people, myself included, is you want to find that perfect piece of land, right? And you don't want to lock it in, because there's always going to be something. And what I've found with my research on strategic relocation is it's almost a zero-sum game, because you could have your own private island, okay? But you have to deal with hurricanes. You can move to California where the weather is great, and there's a super long growing season, and there's all kinds of biomes, and there's mountains, there's palm trees, everything, but there's a lot of people. You can move to Alaska where, there's not a lot of people, there's better OPSEC, but there's freaking giant bears that will kill you, and it's cold half the year. And so what you're saying makes very good sense, and I think of all the things that we talk about today, what you just said might resonate with people the most, because it's about realizing that no matter where you lay anchor, there's going to be problems. And it's incredible though, because I've done a lot of camping, and you have to choose a campsite, right? Like you can't just,
I was going to talk about the exact same thing, that feeling you get into a space and you work with it for a while,
exactly,
and suddenly it starts feeling like your own. You're smoothing out the ground, you get the rocks around your kind of primitive stove together. Once you get into that space and you start humaning, you really just turned it into that perfect space for yourself.
Exactly, and you realize all the potential that maybe you didn't realize at first. I think you just have to make a decision. That old saying, a good plan today is better than the perfect plan tomorrow.
It's something that our entire society is suffering from in so many ways right now. The idea of being just paralyzed with possibility, paralyzed with options. I see it with people in terms of so many people are single now because there's all these dating apps, and people are just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and they always think that there's this other perfect person out there, and because of it people just stay single forever, and it just seems like it's such a part of our society.
Back in the day, there was that one girl down the street, and you either married her or you didn't, and there was no, there was no getting flued out to anywhere, right?
Yeah.
So I know what you're saying. In narrowing your options, like you're saying, that's the most exciting time. But once you kind of locked into a place, then you can really get to work, right? I think if you put just a little bit of thought into it, and you make sure you have all your bases covered, there's a water source, or the neighbor's crazy as hell, or you might want to know about the culture of the region, so to speak.
Yeah. I was looking for land in Virginia when I was thinking about a new place to build in. Virginia seemed like a nice place. It was kind of a little warmer than New England. I got down there, and there were two things that turned me off to that area. No, there were three things. The first thing was that once we were looking at this piece of property, which was beautiful, it had a lake on it, and everything was 40 acres, and I could smell kind of like smoke in the air, and the person leading us around said, "Oh yeah, it's just the neighbors, they burn garbage." So I was saying, that's probably a strike against this place. The second thing was, in terms of the culture, is everyone referred to anyone with non-Caucasian features as colored, and it made me think, I don't think I'm really going to fit in well down here. And the third thing was they had giant spiders, and I'm the kind of guy, I'll take a glass and capture the spiders in my house and bring them outside. I wish them no harm, but I don't want them anywhere near me, and I'm terrified of spiders. So those three things said, Virginia wasn't for me. It's perfectly great for many people, but for me, especially the trash burning, I think that was the thing that really got me. So it is important to actually get onto the space. You can't just look at the stuff on a website and look at a satellite photo. You really got to get in there and get into the environment and see what it's actually like. Spend as much time there as you really can. And I know that's hard it's easy for me to say, and it's hard for people to do. People got jobs. You can't just spend a week on the property. But the more you can do that, before you build, you're going to find out that every property, it lives in a region has a climate, but there are little microclimates. in different areas just on one property where, a certain slope of the hill and the way that the sun hits it will make one area, just bloom so much more beautifully, be so much more alive in the spring. So as much as you can really take that time to really get to know a property before you start really ripping the thing up and make the decisions about where you're going to put a house, there's a lot of dividends that get paid out of that. If you're fighting against nature, nature's always going to win. Or at least, the nature is going to constantly force you to work. So whenever you can kind of set yourself in accord with nature and have it work for you, it's just going to make your life so much easier.
Off camera here, we were talking about the motivations to prepare. And one of the motivations for a lot of people is fear. And I do believe that fear, it's a vital emotion. It's one of the most primal of emotions. And a lot of people, though, are motivated by, the end of the world. And I personally believe that we're vulnerable. The more technologically advanced we get, this is what's pushing people into preparedness, whether they know it or not. But there's also the other end of things. You talked about running towards something as opposed to from something. Now, from a thriving perspective, I would say that fear will help you survive, but fear won't help you thrive. So you almost need both. You need a little bit of fear to put the fire in your ass, to do the things that you have to do to survive. But if you want to thrive, that's when you have to maybe make yourself vulnerable to the world a little bit, learn to trust people, learn to potentially see the reward in what you're doing for the sake of it, as opposed to doing this because I don't want to die type thing. Could you maybe talk a little bit about what you said about being motivated to run towards as opposed to from?
I guess the way that I look at it is that it's good to run away from danger, but it's more fun if you can see something that's up ahead of you and be running towards that while you're running away from the bear. So that's kind of the way that I look at it. As a prepper, there is no critique that you hear more frequently than, why are you living in fear? Because I think that's the way much of the outside world sees what we do. And I think that says more about the outside world than it says about us. When I'm met with that critique, what I'll oftentimes do is I'll give people kind of a scenario that goes along these lines. You've got a dog and a mouse and they're in a room and they're looking outside the room and there's a cat out there. And oftentimes preppers will sometimes be compared to being kind of like pessimists. They're living in fear. They're worried about what's going to happen. They see everything through that lens of fear. So the mouse looks outside and it sees a cat and it says, there's a cat outside. And there's a cat outside. Now, if someone listens to that mouse, they're going to be listening to that mouse through kind of the idea that the mouse is afraid of the cat. So, why is the mouse acknowledging that there's a cat outside? Because, that's a fearful idea. Why is the mouse existing in that? Now, the reason is because there literally is a cat outside. It's just, whether you're in reality or not in reality. When the dog looks outside, the dog sees a cat and the dog says, there's a cat outside. Nobody looks at the dog and says, oh, you're being so pessimistic. You're living in fear. You see that cat outside, because the dog's not afraid of the cat. And I think it's kind of a similar thing with, people who are into prepping. When you've prepared for things and you are genuinely ready for certain scenarios, like, the power going out or whatever, you're not really afraid of it. And that is what being a prepper is about, is handling problems so you don't really have to wonder whether or not you're afraid of it or not, because it's not even a problem for you anymore. It's turning yourself from a mouse into a dog, not because you are afraid of cats, but just because it's inconvenient to be a mouse and have a cat, biting you in half. So why not turn yourself into something that doesn't suffer from that problem? And that's the way that I look at all of this. It's fine to begin with a feeling of fear. Like myself on my journey, I was afraid of losing food in my refrigerator. I was afraid of having to go over to the neighbor to get water. If I lost power in my house and I couldn't run my well. That's one way of looking at it, and that is a fine way to start off. But I think a lot of people, and I know you Nate, on your channel, you'll oftentimes talk about people who will accuse you of instilling fear in people.
The weird thing is that motivates them to click on the videos, even though when it's kind of, because we we understand how human psychology works, and in spite of people's criticisms about fear mongering at their core, that's one of their most primary motivations in life anyways. So it's like if we can kind of grab you, and then our actual message is not one of fear, like our actual...
Yeah, no, it totally isn't. Yeah.
So
that's why I always think people are so off base when they accuse you of fear mongering, because I'm like, in some of your videos, you'll talk about people who watch your videos and then they'll accuse you of creating a bunch of fear in them, and then like, quote unquote, nothing ever happened. And, they felt like they wasted their time prepping, and now they're out, they're done. They don't want to mess with this thing that they think is a waste of time. Now, there's two problems with that. One is like their time horizons were way too short, because this stuff happens way slower than like Hollywood would like you to think. But the deeper root issue here is that people get motivated by the fear that they feel through no fault of your own, through the things that you're telling them about that they're not ready for, because in this case, they're the mouse, they're not the dog. If they were the dog, it wouldn't be fearful at all. But they feel that sense of fear because you're talking about things that are very plausible, that have a high degree of likelihood of happening. They're not ready for it. They feel fear. They take steps. And then, because things don't happen immediately, they will say that they're just not going to do it anymore. And the reason for that is because they were only motivated by the fear. And I think that is a real danger for anyone that wants to begin down this journey. Is it's fine to have a reason to want to start doing this because you want to avoid things. You don't want to get locked out of your house. You don't want to fly through your windshield when you're driving, so you put a seatbelt on. Wearing a seatbelt is being a prepper. It's fine to be motivated by a sense of wanting to avoid things, but if that is all that's driving you, your energy is going to run out really fast. That's like the sugar. You need like the carbohydrates and the fats to keep you going. And the carbohydrates and the fats, those are the things that are long-lasting energy. What that is for a prepper is the stuff that you're moving towards, the rewards that go beyond the idea of, I don't lose my powers during a blackout, or somebody breaks into my house and I'm not completely incapable of defending myself. Once you kind of get past all those kind of things and you start realizing that a lot of this kind of independent lifestyle is actually pretty freaking amazing, that is the stuff that keeps you going. That is the stuff that gets you up in the morning because you're excited about a project that you're working towards. This morning, my parents are visiting my place and we're milling up lumber. We've got a bunch of trees that we had felled when we were making this place. We stacked them off to the side for a couple of years, and the ants have had their say with the first outer inches of those. But we've got a lumber mill and we're starting to cut those things into boards, and it's a wonderful experience. It's like what Michelangelo talks about when he gets a big piece of marble and he finds this beautiful sculpture within the raw marble. It's something that makes you excited to get up in the morning. The idea that I get to get up and I let my chickens out and I see my chickens all clucking around, and I get fresh eggs from the hens. And if you come up with an idea out in the country that you want to make happen, you don't have to ask permission of all your neighbors that are breathing down your neck. You don't have to, go to the town and find out is it okay to do this? Please, sir, may I do X, Y, and Z with my life, with my day today? You have that kind of autonomy, and that autonomy it's really addictive. It is a wonderful feeling to just have an openness at the beginning of each day that you have when you are, not having to live in that kind of rat maze of, getting up and, working for the man. And, I've gone through that, and I had jobs that I really loved. In fact, one of the biggest things I miss about film production, which used to be my main job, is the people I used to work with. It was like hanging out. I got paid to hang out with people. Every day was great. I don't miss the commutes. You have to commute many hours to get to New York City or Boston or something like that to do the work. But, I love that kind of 9-to-5 work, and you get your coworkers and everything, but it's also really wonderful when you break yourself out of that kind of pattern. And the world has this openness, this kind of magic to it, where every morning you could do anything that you want that day because you are kind of making it up on your own. There's a responsibility to that, and you have to take that responsibility seriously, but there's just a wonderful buzz that just comes out of that.
That's very well put. And
I hope so, because there were a lot of words there.
There's some good gems in there for sure.
Okay.
You were the first person, I think I quoted you on the channel. You said that Hollywood tends to condense the timelines of disaster because it makes it more engaging for people. And what happens is these people who are motivated by fear anticipate that these things are going to happen like they do in the movies. They're going to unfold really quickly. Like, I'm thinking of World War Z, you know, 1 second Brad Pitt and his wife and kids are in the car, and then the next second, you know, and then we have this pandemic that goes on for 3 years, and, you know, it falls short of people's expectations of what a pandemic is supposed to look like in the movies. And then all of a sudden people like throw up their arms and say, well, I'm not going to do this anymore because this is pointless, right? Because like you just said, you're motivated by fear, and you're forgetting that there's also an added benefit. There's a silver lining to your efforts in that autonomy that you're going to achieve once you do become more self-reliant. You know, let's talk a little bit about worst case scenarios, like in terms of what is your worst case prognosis for the world we're living in right now?
On my channel, I don't tend to get into the weeds too much about worst case scenarios. And the reason for that is two things. One, I don't know what the hell's going to happen. I don't think anybody really knows what the hell's going to happen. I know a lot of people have this rosy view that there's some kind of elite somewhere and they're pulling all the strings. And I think a lot of people almost think of that as being like a comfort, that if whatever's going to happen, at least there's humans that are in control of this. They may be evil humans, but at least humans have their hands on the steering wheel. I don't see it that way. I think that what is driving this is chaos and the randomness of a million different actors all performing their own individual roles. And I don't think anybody really knows where things are going. In terms of what that means, like, will there be a worst case scenario and what that might be? I guess the shorthand would be is that I have a nuclear fallout shelter that I built behind my house. So obviously I take this type of thing seriously, and I don't want to be caught with my pants down, literally or figuratively. So I like to take steps towards potential worst case scenarios manifesting themselves, but I don't like to dwell there, and I like to focus on solutions that have benefit outside of worst case scenarios. For example, the fallout shelter that I made is also a root cellar. I would not have wanted to invest the time and effort several years ago, before anyone was even thinking about nuclear war seriously. I mean, a lot has happened in the past couple of years. But back then, when I was so young and naive, I don't know whether I would have wanted to invest, I think it was like $9,000 for that thing. I would not have wanted to put that kind of money into a fallout shelter if that's all it was. So I built it in a way where it was also a root cellar. So even if that terrible end doesn't happen, and we all hope that it doesn't happen, I get some kind of a benefit out of it. In terms of things like civil unrest, mobs of crazy, like almost zombified humans. I don't mean like from a virus, but like from their mental illnesses. Zombified people roaming the streets, looking for, looting opportunities and that type of thing. I think if you look through history, you can't come away with any conclusion other than the fact that stuff has happened before, and how could it not happen again? As to whether that happens next week, next year, a decade from now, tomorrow, I don't really know. But whenever I'm taking steps to address things like that, I always like them to be things that are going to pay me off in some other way. So I don't tend to worry that much about different worst case scenarios as much as kind of pairing the types of things that you would do to prepare for a worst case scenario with actions that are going to give me benefit during things that happen more frequently, like, storms and floods and wildfires and, power outages, things like that. And things that are going to give me benefit even if none of that stuff happens. Anyway, the point is that I like things that are going to give me payoff, whether that worst case scenario happens or whether it doesn't happen. But I think the question about whether those types of worst case scenarios that we talk about will happen, honestly, how could they not? You look back through history, and the anomaly is stable civilizations. Although I guess it kind of depends on how you look at it, glass half full, glass half empty. But we've never in the history of humanity ever had a civilization that didn't collapse. Ever. It always happens at some point, and there's always going to be at least some degree of friction and difficulty. Even something as vanilla as the collapse of the Soviet Union, that was a rough time for people who lived there. It wasn't like their entire power grid went down and they got hit with a meteor and there was a zombie outbreak or reptilian aliens invading their country or whatever. It was a complete collapse of their political way of life, and the whole society reordered itself around that. But it was a really difficult time, and for people who were more autonomous and were not as reliant on things that are unreliable, continuing, it was a much easier ride for them. And that's what it's all about with prepping. It's not about making everything perfect for yourself. It's not about living forever. No matter what we do, we're not going to live forever. It's just about trying to make your time better, whatever that means. And that's the way that I look at it, is just taking steps, whether it's a worst case scenario or just it's really dry outside and I don't want to go outside, or some stupid kind of like first world problem or whatever. That's an offensive term now, isn't it? First world problems. It just trickled out of my mouth. Yeah.
But that's not...
Whatever the situation is, I want it to make my life better. So that's the way I see prepping.
You talk about how it's not going to be a rapid thing. It's going to be slow burn. And I think that's the scary part too, is that it's going to be this protracted thing where I think I said in one of my videos once that, like the sudden Mad Max would almost be better in a way than the slow fading deterioration, because then at least you could make your own laws. Like you don't have to worry about, there's not that ambivalence around, do I defend my property in this way or do I don't? Like if the shit hits the fan and people are on your property trying to steal shit from you, then it's a quick fix, right? But if it's not like full blown shit hits the fan and there's still this semblance of law and order somewhere, then you still have to be kind of careful. So it's almost like there's the slow deterioration is almost worse in some ways. It's an unknown, it's an uncertainty as opposed to a known crappy situation, right?
Well, because you don't know where you are along that continuum. It's kind of the difference between, like, if you're in a restaurant and somebody walks into the restaurant and pulls a weapon and you're behind them, I mean, there's no question. It's like, well, I don't know, is it socially acceptable for me to jump this guy? I don't know. Like, I mean, obviously in that case, you try to, do whatever you can to take that person down. But if it's a situation where you're in a restaurant and someone comes in and they're nudging people, they're being kind of rude, and then it slowly starts escalating, the water's kind of slowly changing in temperature and you're not sure where you are in that continuum. So it makes all of your decisions more difficult and more easily questioned by other people, because not everybody is psychologically at the same level at the same time. So what's appropriate maybe from your perspective and maybe some other people's perspective isn't going to be appropriate in other people's eyes. And if those people are the people in power, then that's a problem for you. So it does make it more difficult.
I like what you said too about the people's hope and I see this all the time whenever there's a major event or whenever there's a crisis, it's always a manufactured crisis. And like you're saying, it's likely that it's just the entropy of our society, the chaos that's emerging, and there's people who kind of hold out some hope in a way that everything is artificial, everything is man-made, and they make no room for the fact that what if the Earth is warming because of the greenhouse effect? What if the pandemic was due to something that our civilization created the preconditions for the emergence of that sort of thing? What if, as opposed to, like everything is engineered and people immediately gravitate to that because then they don't have to be responsible for anything.
Yeah. Well, it's also less terrifying to think that people are in control, because if people are in control, they're only going to let it go so far, but if no one's in control, it's just utter chaos. The universe is a cold, heartless place, and the sky's the limit at how bad things could get if there's no human in control, I mean, it could just be nothing left on the Earth. The Earth could just be a cinder. Now, if there was an evil elite that were in control, they'd never let it get that bad, at least. It'd still be people. There'd still be human fingerprints on our future. But if there's no human involved, it's just the coldness of the empty universe that's running this. And I think that's much more terrifying than some kind of like cabal of secret people meeting with each other and planning our demise. Personally, I think of it that way.
And when you know, like I do, that one of the top billionaires in the world had a bunker built by somebody you know, it's almost like, okay, these people are not nearly as prepared, and they're not nearly, they don't have as much of an agenda as people think. Like they're just, flying by the seat of their pants by the rest of us, maybe thinking a couple years ahead, 5 maybe at the best. But yeah, it's once you realize how the lack of forethought and the lack of planning at the top, and how they really don't have a plan. That's the scary thing. Like as I start to get network with more people who are in influential positions, I start to realize, man, they're watching my channel, and it's like, what? What's going on here, right?
In all the years that I was working as a camera operator, I would meet people from all different walks of life. One day I would be doing interviews with people that were clients at a homeless shelter, and then the very next day I'd be working with like the CEO of some multi-million-dollar corporation. And you get friendly with people as you're working with them. You're talking to them about like if you're sitting in an interview setup, you're putting a microphone on them, you're just chit-chatting with them. So you get a sense of all these different people that are in all these different walks of life, people you've never heard of, people who are famous. And one common thread through all of them is that they were all struck me as just being people, and people who have all the same types of problems that all people have. People who have interpersonal issues with themselves and their friends, or have kind of social anxiety issues. There are so many people who are the CEOs of companies who have this kind of constant nervousness about how they're perceived by other people, and you can understand why they would have a lot of those feelings. But the overriding feeling I get from all these people is that they're people. And it makes me nervous for the future of our planet if the people who are running the ship have the same kind of short-sightedness issues that so many of the rest of us seem to suffer from. And in all of my experience rubbing shoulders with these people, they really do. They're doing business plans that kind of go out, several weeks or several months out into the future. But in terms of really getting that 40,000 foot view of things, most people seem like they operate day to day in the trenches. And this is whether they're people who are living day to day in the street, or people who run these these large corporations or work in government. Just because they were granted an enormous amount of power by our society doesn't mean that they necessarily have the capacity to wield that power in a way that is any better than you or I could. And that's a little bit nerve-wracking.
You've said a lot of things today that I think will resonate with people when making that decision, for people who are on the fence, like myself. You said some things.
Yeah, we got to get you going, Nate.
Well,
you're going to love it when you get out there.
Yeah, I have a feeling that, once I get going, it'll come pretty quickly, because, I've been taking the time in order to, build up the resources that I'm going to need to do it in an expedient manner when the time comes. But
that's important too. Do it right. Yeah, I know for my first homestead, I had a lot less cash when I did that one. And there were places where it's like, if you'd just gotten like 2 more dump trucks of fill here, it would have been so much better. So, that's a good idea to, make sure you have enough reserves so you can do it properly. I mean, with that said, don't worry about perfect and have that keep you from getting anything done. But yeah, you want to have the resources so you don't have to skimp too much.
Yeah, absolutely. So go and check out Praxis Prepper. I'll post a link in the description, and I will pin the comment as well. And take a look at his home build. What are your next projects that you have planned to share with us on the channel?
Well, up next, I have a full tour of the house that we're in right now, where we kind of go through a lot of the heating systems. We're walking around and we're kind of looking at everything, and also talking about some of the build process that went into this place. And the best thing about the whole video is that the first 30 seconds or so are done in the style of the director Wes Anderson. So I think that you'll find that part at least engaging, even if you only want to stick around for the first 30.
Sounds good. I will definitely be checking that out. Well, thanks a lot for coming on, man, and look forward to seeing more and hearing more from you and your progress in terms of building out your homestead.
All right, well, I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Awesome.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.